One interesting thing is that we have benefit of capturing all 50 patterns that you might read about as the best things to do for integrating systems, and just make a to-do list. I mean, all the way down to the network level. When you're sending packets over the wire, that's just a buffer somewhere in memory, and it'll index increasing as the wires get the signals across. That's no different than you going shopping and checking off milk, bread, whatever. Works just fine. So to-dos are amazing. It's basically what you hand over to a robot that does the automatic part of your system. And in this case, just like you talk about use cases, systems can be users and users can be users. So we always imagine anything that's done automatically for you, you don't have to have a separate pattern for it. It's just a computer chip doing it for you. But you treat the state and the intent to change state the same way as someone pressing a button on a web page. Keep the patterns to just those two. Keep it simple. Don't get tempted to add another thing. Get a smaller N for getting your average effort. So this is an interesting one. Who here likes functional programming and immutable variables and data stores? Wow, that's a minority. That's scary, okay. We all know that pure functions are great because given the same input, we always get the same output. That's really good for ensuring the system is accurate, right? With this approach, we can teach the business to appreciate that. And they actually appreciate it without you having to teach them that concept. They just say, hey, with this discount applied to this type of invoice, I always get this much money off. Yes, you do, and it'll always be like that. It's wonderful to illustrate that to business. The other thing that happened is that we now have dependable velocities and estimates. Yes, I am not part of the no estimate movement at all. I'm quite opposite. And that's because after hundreds of projects, we have really good data on how much effort it takes to change state for any number of situations. So that's pretty good. If I know how long that takes for a junior or a senior, I can plan out how long my project's going to take and how much it's going to cost. The other thing we get is a clear separation between functional and non-functional. We have the ability to change our infrastructure anytime we improve anything in it for all projects that we ever did. And we can guarantee, just like in the serverless world, that if Amazon or whoever upgrades their infrastructure, we still ship the same function. Wouldn't that be good on your laptop and everywhere else? Or even from the business perspective? So how do we do that? We work in slices. So anytime there's this green box or this blue box, and anything above it and below it is what someone has responsibility for. And this anatomy of a slice is, well, do you have the right token for being authorized there? Do you have the right state before it? Do you have a good precondition that you're relying on as to what information exists in the system? Are you leaving the system, if you're changing state, in something that's expected according to this diagram? Very easy questions to answer, and we just go slice by slice by slice. And because we have good metrics on it, this little cartoon, I'm sorry if some of you can't read that, can't be a reality. So in the little cartoon, in case you can't read it, someone actually meets their objectives and progress, and what happens? Their boss punishes them by dumping more stuff on their heads, right? That's not cool, but that's what happens. So the other thing that we don't do is we have no code reviews. We don't care. And we haven't cared for 7 years. That allows us to hire anyone. That allows me to be totally impartial and not subjective, and allow diversity, and allow anyone that wants to do the job to do it. The only thing I care about is this blowing up memory? Is this returning within a few milliseconds? If it doesn't destroy the system, these little pieces, because it's just 2 patterns, are very interchangeable. If someone does mess up, and maybe they're on holiday and they have to fix it, I don't want to swim through their code. They might have, single variable names. They might have a ton of indenting that I don't like. They put their semicolons at the beginning of the line. I don't care. I replace that whole thing because it takes me very little to do that. I have quantified the replacement. It's like this alternator in this car is broken. I am not going to start unscrewing the screws on the alternator to try and fix it. It might have been a knockoff or a rebuild with some weird soldering on it. I'm going to buy a new alternator and I'm going to put it in its place. Makes sense, right? You don't ever fix your own alternators, I hope. So that goes back to like why I'm looking at what are we doing with the rest of the world that is just common sense that we're absolutely not doing in software. Like, what kind of planet are we living on? Sometimes I look at what we used to do and why I refuse to work that way anymore. And yeah, you kind of have these discoveries. So we have no imposter syndrome. It's one of 4 patterns. And if someone says, how do you do that? Look in the Git history. You can see exactly how Joe did that. Please cut and paste that code and change the event name and the data that it contains and some of the if statements so the validation is correct and continue. Should be deploying to production within an hour of getting hired. So that's part of onboarding as well. Like, there's no book. There's no handbook to read for 5 months or whatever. It's pretty simple stuff. It's do what the other slices did. The fixed costs are incredible. So we've switched entirely to working just in fixed costs. There's no time and materials except for when a client asks us to help with some infrastructure. Maybe they're implementing or deploying event store or something, some technology that we're familiar with, then we'll have some time and material statements of work. But everything is fixed cost. And that means everyone knows what everyone makes. There is nothing hidden. I can't give someone a promotion and another person no. I charge X amount per slice. There's 100 slices in the solution. If you build that slice, you get 2/3 of the price. Everyone does for everything. It's an open book, full transparency. No psychopaths want to work in our organization because they have nowhere to hide or nothing to hide behind. The done is done problem in gold plating, that idea that you're only responsible for a state change and anything that it affects immediately, or the data that it's consuming, allows you to not second guess or walk on eggshells. The design actually has accounted for the fallout of what it means to store that information as part of your state change. So done is easy. It's not a question for us at all anymore. We get no merge conflicts. And when we do, it's because someone screwed up. You know what merge conflicts are good at? If you're getting merge conflicts, it means your solution sucks. You have no modularity. You have ad hoc ways of developing. You have no design at multiple different levels. If you're changing the way you use source control because you're scared of merge conflicts, it's like taking flu medication because you got like symptoms for cancer or something. It's just the wrong thing. You're covering things up. Merge conflicts tell you a lot. Tell you a lot about the quality of your process and your solution. So if you can't go somewhere to find out how you fix a merge conflict without that other person being there, you should probably look at that. For 7 years, we haven't had any bug that took more than 4 hours to find, fix, deploy, ever. And I never want to have those problems ever again. It was one of the things that I wanted to have. Some of the secret sauce is that we don't just do event modeling, we do event sourcing. So we always have a breadcrumb trail of how we got to a specific state. And that's actually really cool. I mean, we pull down the event streams from production and look at what happened. We reference the event model to get context as to when that would happen. Very quickly solved. Anything that we do, 2 days for an MVP, with not MVP that you're going to throw away, like the next slide's coming up. We're talking MVP that you get to keep. We keep most of what we write for a spike, for a test, because we're reusing the same patterns. We're using the same projects even. That's really good. That's very repeatable. So that's where we can have entire templates. Hey, we're going to have to log in for this new system. Oh, why don't we just copy this login part from this other system, from that event model, and put it here. Maybe we'll change a few things, but it's all exposed there. You see what information's captured at each point. It really does fast forward the design, doesn't it? Feels a lot different than UML days, right? So, yeah, that's kind of, we want copy-paste. It's, you know, if things worked before, why change them? Why make every single problem a brand new Rubik's Cube to solve? So the history was, kind of got spoiled by learning event sourcing from Greg Young over a year with a lot of beer. So that kind of helped forget the previous stuff and fill the void with event sourcing. And thank goodness, because event sourcing is everywhere. You don't magically forget your old address after you move. The fact that you moved has a projection into where your kid goes to school. It has a projection to how much your insurance is. Those are two different models. So this stuff's everywhere. This is not cool architecture stuff to do if you have time. This is actually how the world works. So 2015 is where, after consulting for 7 years, and probably like a lot of you that are trying domain-driven design and are doing the good thing of the brown bag lunches and really moving things forward, I think you're starting to hit some ceilings, maybe some opposition, maybe some people that said they were interested, but they're really not doing much. And that was it for me. I didn't want to have any more artificial impediments to doing what I knew was right. And I started a company to just do that. And out of that, because I was a startup, I guess still am a bit, we didn't have much money for a lot of stuff. And event modeling fell out of the fact that we couldn't afford to have low quality. We couldn't afford to have 10 different processes. We couldn't afford 2 different product owners and a project manager and a scrum master and a QA and a whatever. I needed to do all that for free. And there was nothing I could look at out of the box that would do that. Nothing. And so that's where this naturally fell out from. And in 2018, it had to be given a name because there was similarities between event storming and a few other things in UML, and obviously the UX UI from storyboarding and user stories. But all those different practices had an aspect. Event storming had a great workshop format, but they threw away everything at the end of it. Later on, they made other ones, but at that time, they did anyway. And so yeah, we needed to do all those things for next to nothing, for pennies on the dollar. And we've never been funded, bootstrapped everything, and we're able to deliver solutions that scale from an MVP with those exact same lines of code running to millions of users. So what's the future? Like, if you do an event model and you have enough examples, what does AI do? You feed AI examples, right? And then it finds things out there that puts the solution together. So we'll still be programming, but I think we'll have a lot more help from our tooling after this year. And if we have some standards of how we talk about this information flow in a system, and that's how the examples are given, then I think we're we're onto something. We can stop with all the details that are getting in the way of, hey, is this validation for email the same as this other system? Why isn't it? Those kinds of things. Those are details we shouldn't be worrying about. So it's been a hit. A lot of people love it. You know, oh man, everyone was blown away. Someone was asked to do an integration, right? Easily the most productive session I've ever led. There's tons. People are discovering this organically. I don't do any SEO. The article that I wrote hit top story at the end of October in 2018 on Hacker News. And it took off from there. There's tools that are coming out. That's Bobby Calderwood that works for Capital One. He's doing an entire product based on this. There's others too. There's about 3 or 4 other products. This is the most prominent one, where you'll have something that's a little bit, scales better than Miro, because after a while you get a nice large blueprint in Miro, and things start, depending on your computer, the browser just starts to, shake and lock up. So you don't want that. So there's tools coming and people working on things to make this a reality. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I had. I just wanted you to not really do event modeling, but think about what it enabled for us, and see, at least, if you can't do those things, ask yourself why. And that's the team in Vancouver on a trip to Calgary. So if you want to follow me, that's Twitter. If you don't want my rants on open source, you can just follow event modeling. And eventmodeling.org, obviously. If you just Google it, that's where you can read about how to actually hold one of those sessions yourself. It's fairly simple. It's a nice workshop format that's fairly open, friendly, not intimidating, because you're just talking about information. So thank you very much.
Alrighty, if you're online, feel free to pop in some questions and then I'll read them out. In the meantime, have we got any from the floor? Yep.
I'm surprised there's questions, okay.
Thanks, Adam, that was awesome. It's kind of seductive there. There's a lot of practices that, are accepted, common knowledge, that you kind of thumb your nose at a bit there, feel like you don't need them. The one thing that scares me the most probably is, given that events are so immutable, the further you progress with the project, the more locked in you become to your structure. So it seems like the message here is you solve that by having good upfront design and a process that works upfront. What happens when you get it wrong, if you need to pivot halfway through?
Well, I did have a change management slide in there. So, like in accounting, if you, actually I should say this, because we were talking over dinner last night, and information is money. And so I like to treat information systems like accounting systems. So what happens when you open up another bank account, because your business is different now and you have to take US dollars as well? Does that make your previous abstraction wrong? No. Abstractions are very temporary. Notice I didn't have anything about patterns of abstractions, how important those are. Information is the core. Your abstractions may be right, but they're almost immediately wrong because business has moved on. So they're helpful for a very limited amount of time, and I think another thing that we don't do is we don't do any of the traditional OO or any other kind of designs for abstractions. They're just a tool to make sure that the state gets correctly from A to B, and the transformation of information from C to D is correct. And that's why those slices, and whether you use a class of some sort and some inheritance, I don't care. I really don't. You move to a new abstraction when your business changes. Those events have to be projected in a different way, the past ones, as your business changed. Accounting's been a very good field for dependable information for thousands of years. And if you treat your information system the same way, you'll get the same results. So no matter if something changes, and this design seems final, but it isn't. It means that at least I want to align with everyone so that we're not pulling in opposite directions. It doesn't guarantee that I get the design so right that the business won't want to change. Of course it'll change, and then we'll change the design, and we'll have a migration path for how we interpret the previous events for our new understanding. And maybe we'll have to introduce new events. Maybe we'll stop using some old ones that we no longer need. But we have a path for that, and that would never, ever take a traditional database migration over what you can do with events. It's night and day. The previous way of migrating a whole normalized canonical database to something that's working with streams, it's a night and day.
So you talked a lot about the positive things with event modeling. What are some perhaps downsides to it, or even just what are some challenges you've encountered with event modeling?
Lots, like anything. I mean, we had the same challenges with Agile in 2000. Adoption, changing the way people work. Almost every technical problem that we have is actually a people problem. There are definitely people that carry a lot of baggage from, you know, their experience, their very good experience in traditional development, and they want to start to apply the same measures like code quality or something else that no longer have as much relevance. And so it encumbers their progress, and then they say, hey, this eventing stuff and event modeling, it's actually not helping me go faster. As an experienced person, I should actually go faster if I get this new way of working. The amount of unlearning that has to happen when you're changing is always underestimated, and I think that's the biggest problem. And in fact, I think there's a company here that has an event source system that's run entirely by junior people, and it's like clockwork. Tells you something, right? Any other questions?
I'm just curious, like if you've got a project in flight, you know, and you've come into a new organization trying to learn something like this, what's the, I guess, you know, common sort of, you know, productivity loss, sort of that curve like we talked about yesterday before
yeah.
you...
That was going to be my answer.
I guess I'm thinking, you know, like this sounds really good. It'd solve a heap of challenges that I have within my team. But, you know, I'm going to have to turn around and convince the product owner and the founders going, hey, I just want to slow down on this critical product for our startup.
I can still hear you. I can repeat the question. So yeah, like that initial adoption curve, it totally depends on the organization, but especially for startups that don't have any technical folks, when we go in there, we don't have that, so they're spoiled. They know that they can go incredibly fast, because one of the most interesting things about event modeling is that the design allows you to go with full confidence without walking on eggshells about, okay, right now someone hit the button, the most important thing for me to do right now is to store this event and move on. I'm not second guessing what that's going to hit next or anything like that, because I've done the design. So that confidence is remember, courage is part of Agile? Like one of those things that, if I go back here, that people said, event modeling is a communication tool that true Agile requires. This is not me talking. This is other people talking, right? They were able to go faster than they were ever able to go with traditional tooling, right? So, you know, if you're, again, this is like Rust. You need to have that dip. Generally, I find that people at the top that have money, they like accounting terms. And knowing where their money's going, so they naturally are more likely to be open to this rather than set in their ways technical folks that are senior, right? I see the most curmudgeon-y people about this are people that have been in the industry for 30 plus years that they just can't accept that there's better ways. And so I think the answer is very similar to Rust or any other change for the better in our industry. Unfortunately, there is no easy answer. It's a people problem, and I wish I was a psychologist to give you something deeper, but I'm not.